Right now, everyday workers in Ahmedabad are getting paid an extra 850 rupees a day. And not for working, but literally just because a thermometer hit a specific number.
Yeah, and on the completely opposite end of things, the government is bleeding like 1,000 crore rupees a day just to keep the price of your commute stable.
It's wild. Today, we are looking at a system in the middle of a profound shock. Welcome to the deep dive. We know you, the listener, are likely a UPSC aspirant, or maybe just someone who really needs to navigate these complex policy waters. You don't just need a summary of the headlines, you know?
Right, you need to understand the administrative friction, the invisible threads connecting all these seemingly random data points.
Exactly. Because the challenge with policy analysis is that we often view economics or climate or foreign policy in total isolation.
Which is a mistake. I mean, a heat wave in the Pacific alters our domestic inflation, which then rewrites our labor laws, and ultimately shifts our defense strategy in the South China Sea. Today, we are mapping that exact chain reaction.
Our stack of sources is incredibly deep today. We are pulling from hard RBI data, the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, geopolitical editorials, Supreme Court dockets, and on-the-ground administrative reports.
A lot of ground to cover.
It is, but our mission today is to decode India's structural shifts as of May 2026. Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start with the engine driving the entire machine, right? The macroeconomic reality.
Right, and the current numbers paint a pretty sobering picture.
Yeah, HSBC just sharply downgraded India's FY27 GDP growth estimate to 6%, predicting 2 rate hikes on the horizon.
And the underlying catalyst for that downgrade is what's really notable here. It isn't just, traditional market fluctuation.
Right, it's the climate.
Exactly. Analysts are pointing directly at the El Nino effect and rising temperatures. They're projecting that climate factors alone will add a full 0.5 percentage points to our inflation.
Wow.
Yeah, so we're watching the physical climate crisis directly dictate fiscal policy.
And compounding that internal pressure is this external geopolitical shockwave from West Asia. Now, physically, the government is projecting confidence. We are holding 60 days of crude oil reserves, 60 days of natural gas, and 45 days of LPG rolling stock.
Plus, our Forex reserves are sitting comfortably at like $703 billion.
Right, 703 billion. But here's where the narrative splits from reality for me. How can we have 60 days of physical stockpiles, yet our oil marketing companies, the OMCs, are staring down 2 lakh crore in under-recoveries in just the first quarter of 2026?
It's a massive disconnect.
Like, what is the actual mechanism breaking down here?
Well, the breakdown happens in the gap between global procurement and domestic retail. These OMCs, they purchase crude oil at these fluctuating, heavily inflated international spot prices.
Okay.
But to shield citizens from the 30 to 70% fuel price hikes we're seeing globally, the state mandates that OMCs sell this refined fuel at fixed, capped retail prices.
Ah, so they're buying high and selling low by law.
Exactly. The under-recovery is the literal cash loss they swallow on every single liter sold.
Okay.
They are absorbing roughly 1,000 crore rupees of losses daily.
1,000 crore a day. That is staggering.
Yeah, the physical oil is flowing, but the financial ledger is just hemorrhaging.
And the Petroleum Ministry has explicitly confirmed there is no bailout package in sight. I like to think of it like car shock absorbers. The suspension on this economic vehicle is taking the full hit so the passengers don't feel the bumps.
That's a great analogy.
Which brings us to the Prime Minister's recent austerity appeal. To conserve foreign exchange and fuel, he basically asked the public to pause foreign travel, delay gold purchases, and implement work-from-home policies to cut daily fuel consumption.
He also urged farmers to cut chemical fertilizer use by 50%.
Right. And that appeal immediately ignited an intense political debate.
It really did. Opposition leaders like Rahul Gandhi, Mallikarjun Kharge, Akhilesh Yadav, they framed this as proof of administrative failure.
Their argument centers on the idea that the burden of macroeconomic stability shouldn't fall on ordinary citizens, right?
Exactly. They pointed out that the working class cannot simply choose to, just work from home.
I want to push back on the economic logic of targeting the public's golden travel, though. If we look at the RBI data, the real drain on our Forex reserves isn't a middle-class family taking a vacation to Thailand or, buying a wedding necklace.
No, it's really not.
It's high-net-worth individuals investing heavily in foreign movable and immovable assets. So why appeal to the broader public when the capital flight is happening at the very top?
Well, the state's messaging often targets broad behavioral changes to build a narrative of collective sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
Even if the hard data points to a concentrated outflow at the top.
Fair point.
However, the Gem and Jewelry Council presented a really fascinating alternative regarding the gold issue. Rather than halting purchases, they suggest aggressively pushing a revitalized gold monetization scheme.
Because Indian households hoard a massive amount of gold.
Right. Roughly 200 tons of bullion annually as passive investments. If the state can incentivize unlocking that gold into the formal banking economy, it creates an enormous domestic buffer.
That makes total sense. It entirely bypasses the need to restrict individual buying habits.
Exactly.
So because the government is busy absorbing these international economic shocks, they are fundamentally restructuring how they manage domestic welfare. Which brings us to a seismic shift in labor policy.
A massive shift.
Effective July 1st, the landmark MGNREGA, the Rural Employment Guarantee Act from 2005, is officially repealed. It is being replaced by the Viksit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivika Mission Gramin, or VB-GRAM-G.
The architecture of VB-GRAM-G completely redefines the federal power dynamic. On paper, it sounds like an expansion, increasing the employment guarantee from 100 days to 125 days per financial year.
But there's a catch with the funding.
A huge catch.
Yeah.
MGNREGA was 100% center-funded for the wage bill. VB-GRAM-G mandates a 60-40 split between the center and the states.
Meaning the states are now on the hook for 40%.
Right. States now have substantial financial skin in the game, which deeply alters their ability to implement the program if their own budgets are already constrained.
And here's where it gets really interesting for me. They expand the safety net to 125 days, but simultaneously introduce a 60-day blackout period, which individual states will notify?
Yeah, the blackout period.
Doesn't that remove the safety net exactly when marginalized workers might need bargaining power against local agricultural employers?
Well, this reveals the dual and often conflicting priorities of the state. The official rationale for the blackout period is to ensure a steady supply of agricultural labor during peak sowing and harvesting seasons.
Because the ag sector doesn't want to compete with government wages.
Precisely. The agricultural sector has lobbied hard against state-subsidized labor pulling workers away.
Right.
But conversely, from a worker protection standpoint, critics point out this effectively strips rural laborers of their bargaining leverage exactly when the demand for their work peaks. It basically forces them to accept whatever wages local landowners dictate.
And beyond the policy design, there is serious administrative friction. A recent LibTech study highlighted that as of May 2026, 11.58 crore registered workers still have pending eKYC.
11.58 crore. That's a staggering number of people.
It is. The government promises no one will be denied work and attendance will be captured digitally via the National Mobile Monitoring System. But for a UPSC aspirant studying governance, the takeaway here is the reality of rural digital infrastructure.
Oh, absolutely.
Relying on patchy internet for daily wage verification is a profound bureaucratic hurdle.
And that administrative hurdle is colliding with an even broader transformation. We are seeing the full implementation of the 4 new labor codes, which went into effect in November 2025.
Right, replacing decades of old laws.
Yeah, these codes consolidate dozens of older laws regarding wages, industrial relations, social security, and occupational safety.
And the opposition is attacking these fiercely. Congress President Mallikarjun Kharge called them the greatest setback for workers' rights since independence, specifically warning about a new hire and fire culture.
And they're pushing a counter-agenda called Shramik Nyai.
Right, Shramik Nyai. But what does hire and fire actually mean in legal terms here? Like, what changed?
Under the previous laws, industrial establishments with 100 or more workers needed explicit government permission for layoffs, retrenchments, or closures.
Okay, so a factory with 150 people couldn't just shut down overnight.
Exactly. But the new Industrial Relations Code raises that threshold to 300 workers.
Oh, I see.
So the opposition argues this leaves millions of workers in mid-sized factories vulnerable to sudden dismissal without state oversight, prioritizing industrial flexibility and foreign investment over job security.
We're essentially watching the state rewrite its entire social contract. But that vulnerability in agriculture and labor is inextricably linked to the physical environment.
It really is.
That El Niño heat driving up inflation, it requires an entirely new framework for survival. Let's look at a fascinating financial tool currently operating in Ahmedabad.
The parametric insurance.
Yes. Women like Hasumati Parmar are utilizing parametric heat insurance. If temperatures cross a specific threshold for 2 consecutive days, they receive a direct payout ranging from 850 to 2,000 rupees.
The mechanism of parametric insurance is really a brilliant evolution in climate adaptation. Traditional insurance requires an adjuster to physically assess and prove damage, which is, It's slow and subjective.
Right, you have to file a claim, wait for someone to check it.
Exactly. Parametric insurance triggers automatically based on an objective data point, the thermometer. It acts as immediate wage compensation for daily earners when the environment becomes physically hostile.
I mean, I'd actually push back on the celebration of this a little.
Oh,
Don't get me wrong, 850 rupees is vital for that worker's family that day. But it is a tiny band-aid for systemic climate collapse. It's microadaptation. It doesn't solve the fact that the heat wave is happening.
no, you are entirely correct. Microadaptation simply buys time. The macro mitigation happens at the infrastructure level, which brings us to the recent solar milestone.
Right, the 150 gigawatts.
India just hit 150 gigawatts of total installed solar capacity, adding a record 44 gigawatts in 2025 alone. That was heavily driven by the PM Surya Ghar scheme.
It's an incredible achievement on paper, but MNRE Secretary Santosh Sarangi pointed out a critical physical bottleneck: grid curtailment.
That's a huge issue.
I want to frame curtailment properly for you listening because it's often misunderstood.
Hmm.
Generating 150 gigalu of solar isn't just about having enough energy, it's about timing and grid frequency.
Right, it's a balancing act.
Think of the power grid like a major highway. When peak solar generation hits at noon, it's like dumping 10,000 cars onto that highway all at exactly the same time.
And the highway just can't handle it.
Exactly. The grid operators have to literally close the on-ramps, rejecting or curtailing clean solar power so the frequency doesn't overload and crash the entire system. It's like pouring water from a fire hose into a bucket with a hole in it.
That traffic analogy perfectly captures the engineering dilemma. The grid must maintain a delicate balance between supply and demand at every single second.
Which is incredibly hard with solar since the sun, sets.
Right. This is why the ministry is pivoting focus toward the green energy corridor. Expanding solar panels is useless without battery energy storage systems, grid-forming inverters, and synchronous condensers.
We need the infrastructure to hold the power.
Exactly. We have to build parking lots and traffic controls for that energy so we can store the noon sun and release it during the evening peak demand.
And while we rush to clean up our energy grid, we are simultaneously struggling with the physical waste of our consumption. An editorial in our stack flags solid waste as a national ecological emergency.
The 2026 framework is going to be tested heavily here.
Absolutely. Landfills have devolved into mountains of methane and toxic leachate, which is highly contaminated liquid draining into the groundwater. It places extraordinary pressure on the upcoming 2026 waste management rules to transition us away from dumping and toward a genuine circular economy.
And environmental security also extends to conservation, which has increasingly become a tool of statecraft.
Wildlife diplomacy.
Yes. Wildlife diplomacy is taking center stage. 2 new female cheetahs from Botswana were recently released into Kuno National Park, expanding the reintroduction efforts that began with Namibia and South Africa.
We are firmly reestablishing the cheetah state identity, and India is leveraging this globally by hosting the first International Big Cat Alliance, or IBCA, summit. They've invited 95 countries to coordinate conservation.
It's a massive diplomatic undertaking.
It is, but what stands out to you about this list of invitees? Because notably, China is unlikely to join. Their wild Amur tiger population has dwindled drastically, with estimates showing only 50 to 70 individuals remaining near the Russian border.
The absence of China at a major ecological summit hosted by India is a subtle but potent geopolitical indicator.
How so?
Well, it underscores how India is positioning itself as a leader in global environmental stewardship, drawing a stark contrast with Beijing's development model. The physical environment is becoming a key arena for soft power projection.
Which brings us to our final transition today. This systemic pressure, resource scarcity, administrative capacity, ecological stress, it doesn't stop at our borders or at the edge of a forest.
No, it permeates everything.
It fundamentally dictates how our democracy handles internal friction and who we choose to ally with internationally. Let's look internally first at a deeply contentious issue in West Bengal.
The Supreme Court is currently reviewing claims from the Trinamool Congress regarding the special intensive revision of the state's electoral rolls.
And the scale of the allegation is just striking. Trinamool claims that 91 lakh voters were deleted during this revision process.
91 lakh.
Yeah, and to understand the political gravity here, their senior advocate pointed out to the bench that in 31 assembly seats, the margins of victory for the newly elected BJP government were actually lower than the total number of votes deleted in those specific constituencies.
That is a very specific statistical point to make in court.
Right. We're talking about over 34 lakh appeals, filed against these exclusions? Look, we are simply laying out the facts as recorded in the Supreme Court docket here. We aren't taking sides on the claims.
Of course. For a student of governance, the administrative mechanism behind these deletions is the crucial takeaway.
Right. The how and why of it.
Exactly. The majority of these exclusions were processed under a category called logical discrepancies in personal details.
Logical discrepancies.
Yes, which is a bureaucratic gray area, perhaps a mismatched initial, or a varied spelling across databases. Trinamool argues this category, which is unique to Bengal, was weaponized, noting that the tribunals lacked the time to adjudicate millions of appeals before the two-phase elections.
Adding to that friction, the chief electoral officer who oversaw this process, Manoj Kumar Agrawal, was immediately elevated to chief secretary by the new state government.
Right.
Now, again, just stating the administrative facts, but you can see how bureaucratic discretion in database management becomes the ultimate battleground for democratic legitimacy.
Oh, absolutely. Internal friction is the hallmark of any complex democracy, adapting to stress. But even as the state manages these domestic legal battles, its external posture is evolving rapidly, driven by the exact same resource and security imperatives we discussed earlier.
Which takes us to Vietnam.
Yes. Last week, Vietnamese President To Lam visited India, and the bilateral ties were elevated to an enhanced comprehensive strategic partnership.
They announced an ambitious trade target of $25 billion by 2030. But let's be honest, the core of this partnership isn't just about supply chains. It is deeply militarized.
Very much so.
We transferred the missile corvette INS Kurban to Vietnam in 2023. Now, there are intense discussions around supplying them with BrahMos supersonic cruise missiles.
The BrahMos is a game changer.
Wait, if we are sending BrahMos missiles to Vietnam, that feels like a profound escalation from just being trading partners. Are we trying to create a proxy deterrent against Beijing in the South China Sea? Because that sounds dangerously close to crossing a geopolitical red line.
The strategy is deliberate and very calculated. We are witnessing India's shift from its traditional Act East policy, which heavily prioritized economic integration and diplomatic ties, to a highly security-oriented Indo-Pacific posture.
Okay.
In geopolitical theory, this is the mechanism of strategic hedging and minilateral balancing.
Minilateral balancing, meaning we are avoiding a formal, rigid alliance like NATO, but quietly building a network of heavily armed friends.
Exactly that. India and Vietnam share acute overlapping threat perceptions regarding maritime coercion by China. Neither Hanoi nor New Delhi wishes to formally integrate into U.S.-led defense structures, which could, provoke outright conflict.
That makes sense.
However, equipping Vietnam with BrahMos fundamentally alters Beijing's deterrence calculation of the South China Sea. It upgrades Vietnam from basic maritime capacity building to lethal capability enhancement.
Wow.
It sends a clear signal that India is willing to be an active security provider, shaping the balance of power well beyond the Indian Ocean.
It's like we are quietly handing high-tech security systems to our neighbors because we know the entire bloc is becoming volatile.
Precisely.
And that brings us full circle. Think about the complex web we have mapped out for you today. We started with a heat wave in the Pacific Ocean that directly spiked India's inflation.
Which then squeezed the economy.
Right. That economic pressure forced oil marketing companies to bleed cash, triggering a nationwide debate on austerity and capital flight.
And in response to those compounding macro pressures, the state fundamentally rewrote its social contract, overhauling MGNREGA into VB-Gs and implementing new labor codes, shifting the balance of power between the center, the states, and the industrial workforce.
At the exact same time, to secure our future against fossil fuel shocks and climate collapse, we pushed our electrical grid to the absolute brink with 150 gigawatts of solar power.
While simultaneously asserting our geopolitical weight against regional hegemony through advanced missile diplomacy with Vietnam.
The dashboard lights aren't just flashing. The entire operating system of the state is being rewritten in real time.
It really is.
So what does this all mean for the future? I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
As India transitions its domestic economy, scrapping old welfare models, overhauling its energy grid with battery storage, and utilizing climate data for parametric insurance, will our future geopolitical alliances be based less on traditional defense hardware and more on green diplomacy and shared technological resilience?
That's the real question.
Right. If the future of global security is entirely dependent on energy independence and climate survival, is India positioning itself to be the ultimate indispensable anchor for the global South.
Something to really think about.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining this deep dive. Keep questioning the narratives, look for the hidden mechanisms driving the headlines, and we will catch you next time.